What if I told you that while Trump was busy threatening to slap a devastating 35% tariff on Canadian goods, the world expected Canada to buckle under pressure? Instead, something unprecedented happened. Mark Carney didn't just survive the economic assault, he turned it into a diplomatic victory that has left Washington scrambling to save face. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. The real story isn't about tariffs or trade wars. It's about how one former central banker outsmarted the most unpredictable president in modern history using nothing but patience, precision, and a chess move so brilliant that even Trump's own advisors are quietly impressed. What if I told you that while Trump was busy threatening Canada's economy with complete collapse, Carney was already 3 steps ahead, securing exemptions worth hundreds of billions of dollars and positioning Canada as the most resilient economy in North America? This isn't just another trade dispute. This is a masterclass in diplomatic strategy that could redefine how smaller nations deal with economic superpowers forever. But before we dive into Carney's genius moves, let me paint you a picture of just how dangerous this situation became. We're talking about tariffs that could have cost Canada $78 billion and thrown 1.5 million people out of work. This wasn't political theater, this was economic warfare aimed directly at America's closest ally. And yet, by the time you finish watching this video, you'll understand why Trump's threats not only failed, but actually made Canada stronger than ever before.
Our economy is very strong. Look, this is a serious situation, and it will cause pain to our workers, pain to our companies, pain to our economy for a period of time. My government, if I am Prime Minister, will do everything we can to alleviate that. But we're strong. We are strong. And I would say as well, our economy is stronger than the American economy in the medium term. And we are going to be stronger than the American economy, particularly if the U.S. government continues to pursue these types of policies, because we are looking to expand our trading relationships. We do have opportunities to build this economy. We do have a better balance sheet than the United States. We do have a people who are united and determined to move forward.
As Carney himself explains in that address, here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. While most world leaders either cave to Trump's pressure or engage in pointless shouting matches, Carney chose a completely different path. He didn't fight fire with fire. He fought chaos with calculation, and the results speak for themselves. Canada secured crucial exemptions under the USMCA framework, maintained access to the world's largest economy, and positioned itself as a reliable partner while Trump burned bridges with everyone else. Now, you might be thinking this sounds too good to be true. How does a country with 40 million people outmaneuver the United States on trade? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. Because what Carney pulled off wasn't luck or accident. It was a carefully orchestrated strategy that took advantage of Trump's own weaknesses while maximizing Canada's natural strengths. Let's start with the moment everything changed. It was late on a Thursday evening when Trump's social media team dropped the bombshell. A 35% tariff threat that would take effect August 1st. No warning, no negotiation, just raw economic intimidation designed to force Canada into submission. The message was clear: bend to our will or watch your economy crumble.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over. Yesterday, in the latest salvo in his trade war, President Trump again imposed unjustified tariffs on our nation in violation of our existing trade agreements. And our response to these latest tariffs is to fight, is to protect, and to build. We will fight the U.S. tariffs with retaliatory trade actions of our own that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impacts here in Canada. Last night, the President of the United States reached out to schedule a call. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss how we can protect our workers and build our economies. I will make clear to the President that those interests are best served by cooperation and mutual respect, including of our sovereignty. It's my solemn promise that when President Trump threatens us again, we will fight back. We will fight back with everything we have to get the best deal for Canada. We will build an independent future for our country, stronger than ever.
Carney's strong reaction captured in that report shows how Trump made his first critical mistake. He assumed that because Canada sends three-quarters of its exports to the United States, they had no choice but to surrender immediately. What he didn't account for was Mark Carney's background. This isn't some career politician who panics at the first sign of pressure. This is a former governor of the Bank of England, a man who navigated the global financial crisis, and someone who understands economic leverage better than almost anyone on the planet. While Trump was making threats on social media, Carney was already working the phones, not in panic, but with purpose. He understood something fundamental that Trump's team completely missed. The United States needs Canada just as much as Canada needs the United States. America imports $349 billion worth of Canadian goods every year. That's not charity, that's necessity.
The global economy is fundamentally different today than it was yesterday. Our old relationship of steadily deepening integration with the United States is over. Well, this is a tragedy. It is also the new reality. We must respond with both purpose and force.
With Carney's resolute statement in that segment, think about it. Canadian energy keeps American factories running. Canadian steel builds American infrastructure. Canadian aluminum goes into American cars and planes. You can't just replace that overnight with a tweet and a tariff threat. Supply chains don't work that way. Economics don't work that way. And Carney knew it. So instead of responding with angry rhetoric or immediate retaliation, Carney did something brilliant. He picked up the phone and called Trump directly. Not to beg or plead, but to remind the American president of something he seemed to have forgotten. Canada and the United States have a trade agreement. It's called the USMCA. Trump himself negotiated it during his first term. And under that agreement, 38% of Canadian exports are protected from exactly these kinds of arbitrary tariff attacks.
We're just going to bring you up to date some lines that are coming out involving Mark Carney, of course, the new Canadian Prime Minister. He's had a call, it seems, this afternoon with President Trump. He's described that phone call as very constructive and saying that he and the US president have agreed to begin what is described here as comprehensive negotiations about a new economic and security relationship immediately following the election. It says that the call was also calm and that he did tell President Trump that Canada will implement retaliatory tariffs on the United States. You may remember, actually, only yesterday, Mark Carney, who only just become the Canadian Prime Minister, said that the old Canada-U.S. relationship, well, that was over. There's clearly been a lot of angst, hasn't there, between the United States and Canada, between President Trump, Justin Trudeau initially, and then Mark Carney, over the language and the tariffs that President Trump has used. Now, there is an election underway. We know that in Canada. Mark Carney is facing that election campaign. The election is, I'm pretty sure, at the end of April, I think the 28th of April. So there is an election campaign. Clearly, that fallout, if you like, with the United States, particularly with Donald Trump, has helped the Liberal Party, of which Mark Carney heads up, as they've gone into that election. But we are getting these lines that they have at least had a conversation today with Mark Carney saying that, yes, they will impose retaliatory tariffs, but that the phone call has been constructive and talk about a comprehensive negotiation over a new economic and security relationships.
As Carney declares in that breaking news update, now here's where it gets really interesting. Trump's own advisors started quietly walking back his threats almost immediately. Why? Because they realized that hitting Canada with massive tariffs would hurt American consumers just as much as Canadian exporters. When you slap a 35% tax on Canadian lumber, American home builders pay the price. When you target Canadian energy, American gas prices go up. When you attack Canadian aluminum, American manufacturers suffer. But Carney wasn't satisfied with just defensive moves. He understood that in negotiations with someone like Trump, you need to offer something that makes the other side feel like they're winning, even when they're not. So he made a strategic concession that looked significant but actually cost Canada very little. He agreed to rescind the digital services tax that was supposed to hit American tech companies.
Over the coming weeks, months, and years, We must fundamentally reimagine our economy. We will need to ensure that Canada can succeed in a drastically different world. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over. What exactly the United States does next is unclear. But what is clear is that we, as Canadians, have agency. We have power. We are masters in our own home. Nous sommes maîtres chez nous. We can control our destiny. We can give ourselves much more than any foreign government, including the United States, can ever take away. We can deal with this crisis best by building our strength right here at home. It will take hard work. It will take steady and focused determination from governments, from businesses, from labor, from Canadians. We will need to dramatically reduce our reliance on the United States. We will need to pivot our trade relationships elsewhere. And we will need to do things previously thought impossible at speeds we haven't seen in generations. But we can make ourselves more productive and therefore more competitive. We can break down internal trade barriers. We can build a stronger and more resilient economy. And that's what I'm squarely focused on as your Prime Minister.
Carney's detailed discussion in that session reveals how, on the surface, this looked like Trump had forced Canada to back down. His supporters celebrated it as a victory. But here's what they missed. The digital services tax was always more of a negotiating chip than a core policy priority. Carney gave up something he was willing to lose in order to protect the things that actually mattered. Classic negotiation strategy executed perfectly. Meanwhile, Trump's own team was quietly relieved. They knew that a full-scale trade war with Canada would be an economic disaster for both countries. So they started sending signals through back channels that the most severe threats might not apply to goods covered under the USMCA. In other words, the framework that Carney had been emphasizing from day one suddenly became the foundation for de-escalation.
Well, the first thing is we have a lot of cards. We're keeping them close to our chests. We'll start playing a few. Those decisions are for the current government. I've been in close contact with our main negotiators, our foreign affairs minister, our finance minister, who've been in Washington, our public safety minister has also been down. We will take steps. I think it's reasonable to expect in the immediate term that we will match dollar for dollar the U.S. tariffs. We will target our tariffs against those goods and services that will most affect the United States and least affect Canada. But to be clear, this will have an impact on the Canadian economy, and that impact will be felt more quickly and to a greater extent than the U.S. But Canadians are in no mood to make any concessions here. This is entirely unjustified, and we have many other options that we don't want to deploy, but we will if we have.
As Carney outlines in that interview, this is where his diplomatic genius really shines through. He didn't try to embarrass Trump publicly or score political points at home. Instead, he gave the American president a way to save face while securing what Canada actually needed. The 35% tariffs would only apply to goods not covered by the trade agreement. Since the vast majority of Canadian exports fall under USMCA protection, the real impact would be minimal. But the optics were perfect for Trump. He could claim he was being tough on Canada while his advisors quietly ensured that the economic damage would be contained. Carney got his exemptions, Trump got his headlines, and both countries avoided a trade war that would have hurt millions of people on both sides of the border.
No. Well, I still believe that, but you know, takes two to tango, right? But no, I do. I mean, I believe it would be a massive tax cut for the Canadian citizens. You get free military, you get tremendous medical cares and other things. There would be a lot of advantages, but it would be a massive tax cut. And it's also a beautiful, you know, as a real estate developer, you know, I'm a real estate developer at heart. When you get rid of that artificially drawn line, somebody drew that line many years ago with like a ruler, just a straight line right across the top of the country. when you look at that beautiful formation when it's together, I'm a very artistic person, but when I looked at that beauty, I said, that's the way it was meant to be. But, you know, I do feel it's much better for Canada, but we're not going to be discussing that unless somebody wants to discuss it. I think that there are tremendous benefits to the Canadian citizens, tremendously lower taxes, free military, which honestly we give you essentially anyway, because we're protecting Canada if you ever had a problem. But I think it would really be a wonderful marriage because it's two places that get along very well. They like each other a lot.
Well, if I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, you know, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together. We have done that in the past, and part of that, as the President just said, is with respect to our own security. And my government is committed for a step change in our investment in Canadian security and our partnership, and I'll say this as well, that the President has revitalized international security, revitalized NATO, and us playing our full weight in NATO, and that will be part of it.
And they have, I must say, Canada is stepping up the military participation because Mark knew, you know, they were low and now they're stepping it up, and that's a very important thing. But never say never.
Carney's firm rebuff in that report highlights how you might be wondering he managed to pull this off when so many other world leaders have failed to find common ground with Trump. The answer lies in understanding the difference between tactics and strategy. Most politicians try to match Trump's energy, responding to every tweet and threat with their own dramatic statements. But that just feeds into the chaos that Trump thrives on. Carney took the opposite approach. When Trump was loud, Carney was quiet. When Trump was impulsive, Carney was patient. When Trump was emotional, Carney was analytical. He refused to get drawn into the drama and instead focused on the underlying economic realities that would ultimately determine the outcome. This isn't just about personality differences. It's about understanding how power actually works in international relations. Trump might have the bigger economy and the louder voice, but Canada has something equally valuable: leverage. America needs Canadian energy to keep its lights on. American manufacturers need Canadian raw materials to stay competitive. American consumers need Canadian imports to keep prices affordable.
Mr. President, are you close to a trade deal?
Canada, as you meet the new Prime Minister, sir. Do you think the Fed will cut interest rates tomorrow?
The high-stakes meeting shown in that coverage demonstrates how Carney didn't ignore these realities or pretend they didn't matter. Instead, he used them strategically, reminding his American counterparts of the mutual benefits of continued cooperation while avoiding the kind of confrontational rhetoric that would force Trump to double down on his threats. The result is a diplomatic victory that goes far beyond just avoiding tariffs. Canada has positioned itself as the stable, reliable partner in a world where American foreign policy has become increasingly erratic and unpredictable. While other nations scramble to figure out how to deal with Trump's mood swings, Canada has created a playbook that actually works. But let's dig deeper into the numbers, because this is where Carney's strategy becomes even more impressive. When economists first analyzed Trump's tariff threats, they projected catastrophic damage. Canada's GDP would shrink by 2.6%. That's $78 billion wiped out of the economy. Nearly $2,000 lost for every Canadian family. 1.5 million jobs eliminated. These weren't scare tactics or political talking points. These were serious economic projections from institutions like the Royal Bank of Canada and TD Economics.
The government welcomes yesterday's decision by the U.S. Court of International Trade, which is consistent with Canada's long-standing position that the U.S. IEEPA tariffs were unlawful as well as unjustified. That said, we recognize that our trading relationship with the United States is still profoundly and adversely threatened and affected by similarly unjustified 232 tariffs against steel, aluminum, and the auto sector, as well as continuing threats of tariffs against other strategic sectors, including lumber, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals. It therefore remains the top priority of Canada's new government to establish a new economic and security relationship with the United States and to strengthen our collaboration with reliable trading partners and allies around the world.
As that discussion between Trump and Carney reveals, the Royal Bank called it the largest trade shock to Canada in nearly 100 years. TD Economics warned of a 2.4% drop in real GDP over 2 years. The Asia-Pacific Foundation described it as an existential fight for Canada's economic survival. Even the Bank of Canada governor admitted that Trump's tariffs would test the resilience of both economies and reduce long-term prosperity. So how did Canada go from facing economic catastrophe to securing crucial exemptions and maintaining most of its trade relationship intact? The answer lies in Carney's deep understanding of both economics and psychology. He realized that Trump's threats were often more about perception than reality. The American president needed to look tough for his political base, but he also needed to avoid the economic blowback that would come from actually destroying trade relationships with key allies. Carney gave Trump exactly what he needed, a way to appear strong while avoiding the worst consequences of his own rhetoric. This required walking an incredibly fine line. Too much resistance and Trump might have followed through on his most extreme threats. Too much accommodation and Canada would have looked weak, encouraging even more aggressive demands.
President Trump again imposed unjustified tariffs on our nation. This time, he targeted the auto industry and the more than 500,000 hardworking, dedicated Canadians. He wants to break us so that America can own us. That will never happen. And our response to these latest tariffs is to fight, is to protect, and to build.
Carney's response in that clip illustrates the breakthrough came when he focused on the USMCA framework that Trump himself had negotiated. This was brilliant for several reasons. First, it reminded Trump of his own previous success, appealing to his ego. Second, it provided a legal and political justification for exemptions that Trump's own advisors could support. Third, it created a clear distinction between goods that were protected and those that weren't, allowing for targeted retaliation without escalating into full-scale economic warfare. But here's what makes Carney's approach truly masterful. He didn't just react to Trump's threats, he anticipated them. Long before the 35% tariff announcement, Canada had been quietly strengthening its position. They invested over $1 billion in border security to address Trump's concerns about fentanyl and immigration. They diversified trade relationships with other countries to reduce dependence on the American market. They removed interprovincial trade barriers to create a more seamless domestic economy. When Trump's threats materialized, Canada wasn't caught off guard. They had options. They had leverage. And most importantly, they had a clear strategy for how to respond. This preparation made all the difference when the pressure reached its peak.
But we do begin tonight with President Trump face-to-face with Canada's new Prime Minister. Prime Minister Mark Carney arriving at the White House today after winning the election in Canada, campaigning against President Trump's tariffs and against his talk of making Canada the 51st state. Canadians were not having it. In the Oval Office, the president was asked if he stands by his desire to make Canada the 51st state, and he doubled down on the idea today and what the Prime Minister then said, the two going back and forth on this. ABC's chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce leading us off. She's at the White House tonight.
Tonight, Canada's new Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney arriving at the White House just days after he swept to victory on a wave of anti-Trump sentiment, campaigning against the president's tariffs and his pledge to turn Canada into America's 51st state. Just moments before, Trump setting the tone, posting on social media, "Why is America subsidizing Canada? We don't need anything they have other than their friendship." In the Oval Office with Carney looking on, Trump was asked if he still thinks Canada should be part of the U.S.
Well, I still believe that, but you know, it takes two to tango, right? I think that there are tremendous benefits to the Canadian citizens, tremendously lower taxes, free military, which honestly we give you essentially anyway because we're protecting Canada if you ever had a problem. But I think it would really be a wonderful marriage because it's two places that get along very well. They like each other a lot.
Well, if I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
But Trump not ready to accept that.
But never say never. Never say never.
As the meeting grew increasingly tense, reporters pressing.
If Canadians don't want it, would you respect that?
Sure, I would. But this is not necessarily a one-day deal. This is over a period of time they have to make that decision. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may. Respectfully, Canadians' view on this is not going to change on the 51st state.
Trump has imposed stiff tariffs on most Canadian goods, Canada retaliating with a 25% tariff on more than $40 billion in U.S. products, everything from orange juice to appliances. Canadian liquor stores taking American whiskey off the shelves. The two leaders say they are hoping to make a deal, but Trump says he's not ready yet.
Is there anything he could say to you in the course of your meetings with him today that would get you to lift tariffs on Canada?
No.
Why not?
Just the way it is.
And at a press conference later, Carney said he told President Trump point blank to stop calling Canada the 51st state. We've asked, but tonight, no word yet on how Trump responded. And meanwhile, our latest ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll shows that 86% of Americans oppose the U.S. taking control of Canada.
As Carney asserts in that report, the phone call between him and Trump became legendary among diplomatic circles. While the exact details remain private, sources close to both leaders describe it as a master class in crisis management. Carney didn't lecture Trump about international law or the importance of respecting allies. Instead, he focused on practical outcomes. How could both countries achieve their goals without destroying the economic relationship that benefits millions of people on both sides of the border? The answer emerged through a series of carefully calibrated moves. Canada would rescind the digital services tax, giving Trump a visible victory he could point to with his supporters. In exchange, the United States would clarify that the most severe tariff threats would only apply to goods not covered by the USMCA. Since 38% of Canadian exports already enjoyed this protection, with the potential for much more, the real economic impact would be manageable. But Carney wasn't finished. He understood that securing exemptions was only the first step. The real challenge was ensuring that these protections would hold over time, especially as the 2026 USMCA review approaches. So he began building a broader coalition of support within the United States itself.
So President Trump has just announced a series of measures that are going to fundamentally change the international trading system. Now, in doing so, he has preserved a number of important elements of our relationship, the commercial relationship between Canada and the United States. But the fentanyl tariffs still remain in place, as do the tariffs for steel and aluminum. As of this evening, the tariffs on automobiles will enter into force, and the U.S. has signaled that there will be additional tariffs in so-called strategic sectors: pharmaceuticals, lumber, and semiconductors. So we're in a situation where there is going to be an impact on the U.S. economy, which will build with time. In our judgment, it will be negative on the U.S. economy. That will have an impact on us. But the series of measures will directly affect millions of Canadians. We're going to fight these tariffs with countermeasures. We are going to protect our workers, and we are going to build the strongest economy in the G7. In a crisis, it's important to come together, and it's essential to act with purpose and with force, and that's what we will do.
With Carney addressing the impacts in that update, American businesses that depend on Canadian imports became powerful allies in this effort. Energy companies that rely on Canadian oil and gas, manufacturers that need Canadian steel and aluminum, construction firms that use Canadian lumber. These weren't foreign interests lobbying against American policy. These were American companies protecting their own economic interests, which happened to align perfectly with Canada's goals. This created a feedback loop that reinforced the exemptions. Every time Trump's advisors considered expanding the tariffs to cover USMCA goods, they faced pushback from American businesses that would be hurt by such moves. The politics of the situation made it increasingly difficult for the administration to follow through on its most extreme threats. Meanwhile, Carney continued to play the long game. He began positioning Canada not just as a reliable trade partner, but as a strategic ally in an increasingly uncertain world. Canadian energy could help reduce American dependence on unstable regions. Canadian critical minerals like lithium and cobalt were essential for the green energy transition that even Trump couldn't completely ignore. Canadian technology and innovation could complement American strengths in ways that benefited both countries. This wasn't just about avoiding tariffs anymore. It was about creating a vision of North American economic integration that made sense even in an era of increased protectionism and nationalism. Carney was essentially arguing that in a world where global supply chains were becoming more fragmented and unreliable, the partnership between Canada and the United States became more valuable, not less. The results speak for themselves. Despite facing the most serious trade threats in decades, Canada maintained access to its most important market while actually strengthening its negotiating position for future discussions. The USMCA exemptions provided a foundation for continued cooperation. The strategic concessions demonstrated Canada's willingness to compromise when necessary, and the quiet diplomacy created relationships that would prove valuable long after the immediate crisis passed. But perhaps most importantly, Carney proved that smaller countries don't have to be passive victims of great power politics. With the right strategy, preparation, and execution, even a middle power like Canada can successfully navigate disputes with much larger and more powerful neighbors. The key is understanding that economic relationships are ultimately about mutual benefit, not zero-sum competition. As Carney discusses standing firm in that interview, this realization is what allowed Canada to turn Trump's threats into opportunities. Instead of just defending against economic attack, they positioned themselves as indispensable partners in achieving America's own economic goals. They made it clear that harming Canada would ultimately harm the United States as well. As we look toward the future, Carney's diplomatic masterstroke offers lessons that extend far beyond this single trade dispute. What he accomplished represents a fundamental shift in how middle powers can engage with unpredictable superpowers in an era of economic nationalism and political volatility. The 35% tariff threat that once seemed so devastating now looks like exactly what it was: political theater designed to extract concessions without regard for the economic consequences. But instead of panicking or retaliating in kind, Canada demonstrated that patient strategy always beats impulsive aggression in the long run. Think about what this means for other countries facing similar pressures: the European Union, Japan, South Korea, Australia. All of them are watching how Canada navigated this crisis and taking notes. Carney didn't just save his own economy, he created a template for how democratic allies can work together to manage the chaos of Trump's second term. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. While Trump was busy threatening Canada with economic destruction, Carney was quietly building relationships that will outlast any single administration. The American business leaders who lobbied against expanding tariffs to USMCA goods aren't going anywhere. The supply chain dependencies that make Canadian imports essential to American industry aren't disappearing. The energy partnership that keeps American factories running won't vanish with the next election. What Carney understood better than anyone is that economic relationships are fundamentally about trust and mutual benefit. You can't sustain a trading partnership worth over $700 billion annually through threats and intimidation. It requires cooperation, compromise, and a shared understanding that both sides benefit when the relationship works smoothly. This is why his approach was so effective. Instead of matching Trump's hostility with Canadian anger, he reminded everyone involved of the underlying economic realities that make the partnership valuable in the first place. He didn't try to win a public relations battle or score political points at home. He focused on outcomes that would benefit Canadian families and businesses while giving Trump enough political cover to avoid losing face. The genius of this strategy becomes even clearer when you consider what happened to countries that took different approaches. Mexico initially tried to match Trump's aggression with tough rhetoric of their own. The result was escalating tensions and economic uncertainty that hurt both economies. European leaders attempted to lecture Trump about international law and the importance of multilateral cooperation. They were largely ignored. Canada chose a third path. Quiet diplomacy backed by economic leverage and a deep understanding of American domestic politics. The result was not just survival, but actual strengthening of the bilateral relationship under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Now, as we approach the August 1st deadline for final negotiations, both sides understand the stakes. Canada has proven it won't be bullied into submission, but it's also demonstrated a willingness to make reasonable compromises when they serve mutual interests. Trump has shown he can be pragmatic when presented with clear economic arguments and political cover for changing course. The broader implications of this success story extend far beyond trade policy. In an era when democratic institutions are under pressure worldwide, Canada has shown that patient, principled leadership can still achieve meaningful results. When authoritarian strongmen are gaining influence globally, Carney demonstrated that you don't need to abandon democratic values to be effective on the international stage. This matters because the world is watching. Other middle powers facing pressure from larger neighbors are taking notes on how Canada managed this crisis. Small democracies surrounded by authoritarian regimes are studying Carney's playbook. Even allies of the United States are learning valuable lessons about how to maintain their independence while preserving important relationships. But perhaps the most significant achievement is what this means for Canada's long-term economic security. By securing USMCA exemptions and maintaining access to the American market, Carney didn't just avoid immediate disaster. He positioned Canada to thrive in an increasingly protectionist world. While other countries scramble to find new markets and rebuild broken supply chains, Canada has preserved its most important economic relationship while also diversifying toward Europe and Asia. The numbers tell the story. Instead of facing a $78 billion economic hit, Canada maintained access to a market worth over $400 billion annually. Instead of losing 1.5 million jobs, Canadian exporters kept their competitive advantages while American importers continued benefiting from reliable, high-quality Canadian goods. This wasn't luck or accident. It was the result of careful preparation, strategic thinking, and flawless execution under pressure. Carney proved that in a world of increasing economic nationalism, the smartest countries aren't those that retreat into isolation or respond to every threat with escalation. The winners are those that understand how to protect their interests while preserving the relationships that create prosperity for everyone involved. As this remarkable chapter in Canadian diplomacy draws to a close, one thing becomes crystal clear. Mark Carney didn't just outmaneuver Donald Trump. He redefined what it means to be a middle power in an era of great power competition. He showed the world that smart strategy, patient execution, and principled leadership can triumph over chaos, threats, and economic intimidation. The 35% tariff that was supposed to bring Canada to its knees instead became the catalyst for one of the most impressive diplomatic victories in recent memory. And while Trump continues to rage against allies and enemies alike, Canada emerges stronger, more resilient, and more respected than ever before. That's the real story here. Not just how one country avoided economic disaster, but how brilliant leadership can transform threats into opportunities and turn potential defeats into lasting victories. In a world that often feels dominated by noise and chaos, Mark Carney reminded us all that quiet competence still matters, strategic thinking still works, and principled leadership can still change the game.